Okay, hello and welcome to this video. I'm Ben from Fitness Fitness, and essentially today we're going to be discussing the correct nutrition I believe you should consume before doing around an 8-hour walk, which is what I attempted a few weeks ago. If you've been watching my videos up to this point, you will have seen that I released a video just after completion of that event. I did manage to do it there for the 50,000 steps in a day in my back garden, which is quite a mad thing to do really, but if you want to do it, you obviously want to do something similar of that ilk in terms of the time it takes to complete, which is around the 8-hour mark in that case, then you want to make sure that your nutrition is up to scratch prior and during the performance of that particular thing that you want to do. My last video was looking at my nutrition that I actually consumed before doing the 50,000 step challenge, and in no ways that nutrition was the best nutrition that I could have had, which is what I'm going to discuss more today, is how I could maybe have improved that nutrition. So my nutrition, as you would have noted if you'd seen my last video, which I advise you to do, so if you haven't checked that out before this one, so go back, do that right now. Remember to like and subscribe in the process of doing that as well. But you'll know if you did watch that the carbohydrate and protein intake on the day before, I did have a good mixture of foods from various macronutrient groups such as carbohydrates and proteins. Now, I should say before going into the detail with regards to what nutrition you should have to perform a 50,000 step challenge or something similar, is I should mention my credentials. So I'm a human biology graduate. I have done various modules in nutrition. I've also done a nutrition module in personal training, which is a level 3 qualification. So I'm in no means an expert. I don't claim to be. I do know bits and pieces about nutrition, and I have researched this particular topic, hence why I'm talking about it to you today. If you have any comments, think I made a mistake or what have you, that's absolutely fine. Feel free to comment that in the comments section of this video. And hope you enjoyed the video, and I'm now going to go into a little bit of background around nutrition, and then we'll go into the specifics of this particular event. So in general, eating any kind of nutrient for exercise, you're essentially fueling that exercise. So exercise requires energy, and the energy comes from the food you eat. Okay, in terms of the type of exercise you do, that will make a difference with regards to what particular food type you should actually consume more of. For example, if you're doing typically higher intensity activities, short burst things, bursts of strength, bursts of speed, that requires quite a different fuel, generally higher in sort of carbohydrates that are quick release than a more prolonged distance event will require in fuel. And a more prolonged distance event will generally be at lower intensity, and it will generally burn more fat, which perhaps is one of the reasons why particularly long distance athletes tend to be leaner than athletes, or I say leaner, lighter I should say, have less fat tissue than those who are performing more higher intensity activities. In terms of the difference between the fat and the glycogen stores that you're actually burning on your body and your diet, they are quite different in the sense that nutrients in the body are converted to different forms. So I should mention that if you eat carbohydrates, it doesn't mean that they're stored as carbohydrates in your body. It means that they're stored as glycogen generally, which is stored in the liver and muscle. If you're consuming fat, for example, it doesn't mean all that energy is going to end up purely as fat in the body in the same form that you ate it in. Okay, so it isn't always exactly as what you eat is actually what is actually used in the body in terms of the form that fuel takes. If you're, for example, eating an excess of calories, no matter what form the calories in, whether they are carbohydrates, whether they are fats, or whether they are proteins, you'll store excess energy as fat in the body. And the percentage of that varies depending on what you eat, which is important to mention because for this particular ultra endurance walk challenge, because it's lower intensity, the energy primarily comes from fat, so you want to know what to eat to increase potentially slightly your fat stores on the build up to it slightly, so that you actually tap into that energy and you have that energy there. So in terms of storage of fat, if you wish to store more fat, the best thing to eat without much surprise is fat, because although excess carbohydrates are stored, a high percentage of them as fat, there's a percentage which is lower in terms of the excess carbohydrates after your glycogen stores are full. You eat more carbohydrates, a lower percentage of those additional carbohydrates are stored as fat than if you eat excess fat in the form of fat in your diet. So essentially, the build up to the walk, you may be inclined to increase your fat intake and to fuel this event, and you'd be perfectly entitled to do so. Fat is a particularly energy dense substrate. What I would say though is because it takes 6 hours to digest, and because the walk event that I did was 8 hours, if you're doing a similar length event, if you had it, say, for a fat source for breakfast, you wouldn't really get much benefit, if any benefit at all, from that, because it wouldn't have even been digested by the time you've pretty much finished the event. So it's not really worth doing. On the day before, the primary thing to do is to increase your carbohydrate intake. Reason for that is if, for example, you're getting in a higher proportion of calories from fat than you would normally, then your body tends to not tolerate that particularly well, that change, and you may well be more prone to diarrhea and stomach upsets and things like that if you increase your fat percentage in your diet. So what I'd recommend to do is increase your carbohydrate intake, and in proportion with that, keep the proportion of fat in your diet as it is at the moment, but obviously eat a bit more as you're eating more calories, because as the percentage will stay the same, the percentage of your overall calories that are made up by that nutrient, obviously it means you're going to need to eat more of that nutrient to make up the same percentage of a bigger pie, essentially, which will be the case if you're having actually additional carbohydrates. Your overall calorie intake is going to increase, so if you keep your fat percentage the same, you're still going to need to increase your consumption of fats relative to what you were doing before. But in terms of where the emphasis should be, should definitely be on the carbohydrates, unless you're, like I say, particularly well adapted to dealing with increasing the calorie intake as fat, which a lot of people will have to go through several months of kind of keto type adaptation for your body to get used to burning alternative fuel sources rather than carbohydrates. So people will say, focus on just having loads of protein, the sort of really sort of higher fat, higher protein, really low carb, high fat type diets. Those, you're more prone to getting some issues, and especially in a build up to an event, you don't want to encounter those digestive issues. So the best bet for most people is to increase your carbohydrate intake. So having discussed that, the day before, you might be thinking the healthier carbohydrate sources to have would be sort of whole grains, the richer, darker fuel types in the form of carbohydrates, things like brown bread, perhaps, things like whole grain breads, whole grain products, you might be more inclined to lean towards, which is perfectly legitimate and perfectly healthy to do ordinarily if you're not doing an event, just to sort of keep your hunger levels down and slowly reset energy over time and potentially lose a bit of weight. That can be a very good thing to do to fill yourself up, so you're limiting the snacking between meals, which is known to potentially reduce your weight. But loading up before a endurance event isn't the same as everyday life wanting to tone up slightly. So therefore you're going to need to take on board this fuel, and you're going to need to deliver it to your body in a fairly efficient way, particularly if you're doing something over a multiple day event, for example, which is ultra endurance events. Although an 8-hour walk is classed as an ultra endurance events can be a multiple number of days before you complete them, essentially. So they're not always a one-day event, they can be more than that. So all I'm saying is, in terms of your fuel type, you need to make sure that it is up to, in terms of the quantity of energy that you're providing your body, it's up to the task of fueling you for whatever you're going to attempt. So with that in mind, delivery tends to be better actually of quick release carbs. The reason for this is because whole grain carbs tend to be richer in things like protein in terms of the product they're in, protein, water and fibre. That means that they tend to fill you up more. And the last thing, if you're carb loading, that you want to be is full, because you want to be hungry, because you want to eat a bit more to get the calories in you need to fuel your ultra endurance event the next day. Because those calories then will be stored in whatever form they're stored in the body, so you can access them when you're doing your walk. So the last thing you want to be is full. So that said, what examples are there then of fuels you should be taking on board of those quick release types? Well, if you look for sort of paler grain products, as I call them, so sort of white versions of products, they can be particularly good in terms of your quick release carbohydrates. So things like white bread, and things like white rice, things like white bagels, all those types of white grains, various cereals and things like cornflakes and what have you are quick release carbohydrates. They're not particularly complex, and they're not like bran flakes, and they're not like the more kind of richer grains that tend to be higher in those nutrients that you don't particularly want if you're carb loading. On the day of the event, so before the event, we discussed a bit about that carbohydrate intake and fats, although you will have to increase, the consumption of fats, because obviously you're eating more overall, you're eating a greater amount of calories, so the same percentage of fat in your diet it should be, but a percentage, let's say, of a larger pie is more, so you're going to need to increase your fat proportionally to the increases in your calorie consumption. And the best way of doing that is to incorporate unsaturated fats, because these are known to be healthier and there's no real disadvantage. They're still going to have the 9 calories a gram, which is why fat's such a great dense fuel source, because it has a lot of energy, so you can get in a lot of energy for a relatively small product. And like I say, so that's a particularly good thing to do, is focus on the unsaturated fats. So a key way to identify that is saturated fats tend to be solid, they're saturated, they're solid. Unsaturated tend to be liquids, or more kind of fluid based. That said, they're not always, so it's not always that simple when they're in other products. Examples of unsaturated fats which might not be as easy to identify are things like hazelnuts, things like almonds and things like pecan nuts. Various other seeds can have be rich sources of unsaturated fat as well. In terms of other sources of unsaturated fat, you get the omega-3s that you get in fish, for example, and you get various cooking oils such as olive oil and rapeseed oil, that again, if you cook with that, that is increasing that intake of unsaturated fats, potentially, if you're having more than you usually would. So those are particularly good things to include the day before. On the day, you should eat 3 or more hours before you start the event, because you don't want to start the event on a particularly full stomach, but you do want to not start the event. You do want to not start the event on an empty stomach, so therefore you want to ensure that you have a good breakfast on the day. Like I say, a few hours before, you want to consume a breakfast that your body is used to. This is because if your body isn't used to it, like I mentioned before with the fats and the adaptation of, say, a low carb, high fat diet or something like that, your body probably won't be used to it, and therefore it's far more likely to have complications and side effects, which more commonly than not, when it relates to diet, it might well be something like gastric complaints, which may cause symptoms such as diarrhea and constipation, issues such as that, which you obviously don't want to get during an ultra endurance event. The next thing that is perhaps the most important thing is hydration. You need to make sure on the day that you are consuming a lot of fluids. Throughout the event, I consumed around 2 litres of fluid within that 8-hour period. That potentially isn't even enough. I would recommend you have even more than that. You really want to be going, if it's particularly if it's a warm day, it's going to vary from person to person, body size and what have you, but you want to be aiming for, the government usually recommends, the government does 6 to 8 glasses of water a day. And in terms of your fluid intake when you're doing an ultra endurance event, it needs to be significantly higher because you're losing a lot of fluid in sweat, so double that. and you might be somewhere close, but make sure that you are consuming a lot of fluid. Not loads in one go, but every now and again, or certainly when you stop, consume, you know, a significant amount of fluid each time you stop. Really, I'd suggest. In terms of snacks, which I haven't yet mentioned, again, it's that carbohydrates to keep you going. Particularly good fuel source because they're accessible far more quickly than fats. You won't be able to benefit from fats if you're consuming them during the event, as I mentioned before. It takes 6 hours around that to digest those, so you're not going to be receiving any benefits from those, especially if you eat them during the event as snacks. So the sort of snacks that you want to consume are things like flapjack. You could have fruits such as apple, you can have honey, you can have raisins, dried fruits, little sweets or what have you. There's a multitude of different accessible carbohydrate sources that you can have during the event. I wouldn't necessarily recommend during the event to have that slow release carbohydrate. If you're adamant on having a slow release carbohydrate, I would suggest that you have that for breakfast on the morning of the event. The reason being, the day before you want to do your carb loading. It's easy, as I said before, to actually get in those quick release carbohydrates on the day. Slow release for breakfast, if it's a slow release you're used to, such as porridge, it's a great thing. If you have a few hours before, your body's already starting to process that, so slowly releasing that throughout the event, which is a really good kind of way to release the energy nice and slowly, which is going to complement your quicker release snacks during the event, such as raisins that are going to release it almost instantly, and bananas and other various other snacks like that. So that's in terms of the snacks on the day, your breakfast on the day. I've discussed the nutrition for your day before. I've discussed various sources of unsaturated fat. I've discussed why you should have certain fuel types and certain release speeds of carbohydrates rather than others. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I apologise it's been a bit long. Feel free to check out this channel in future. My next video will be a book promotion, which is related to my brand new nutrition book, which is coming out this Friday. I'm very excited to announce. So stay tuned for that. There will be a video promoting that. And if not, feel free to check out Feast of Fitness on Facebook, and that will keep you updated on the release date of that, which obviously this is Friday, but in terms of the correspondence regarding that, and the link on there will be available, and that'll be live to Amazon, so you can actually buy the book. It won't be £1.99, and it will be entitled Live Longer, Ingredients for Long Life. So please check that out on Friday by all means. And remember to like and subscribe to this channel. It really helps me. I'm a brand new channel, like really small. Don't hardly get any views at the moment, so it'd be lovely to get a few more. And I hope to see you in the next one. So make sure you stay inside, stay safe, and enjoy any challenge that you want to do. And hope this helps. Thanks, guys.